Hi, I'm Emily Roberson. I'm a novelist. I'm the author of Lifestyles of Gods and Monsters, and I am doing a series about the creative questions that I have asked myself. And I've covered a bunch of things, but one of the biggest of mine for a very long time was how to find critique partners. And so today I'm going to talk about that. I know that's a question a lot of people have. And this holds true whether you were writing or you were making music or you're making some other kind of art. So I'm going to talk about it broadly, and then I'm going to tell you about how I did this, which has made a huge leap in my journey. So the first important thing to know is, what is a critique partner? Because there's a lot of confusion about this. So a critique partner is a reciprocal relationship, which means it's not the same as a teacher on the one hand, for example, or as a friend or family member who reads for you as a favor. Having a critique partner really is a partnership. You're in partnership either with one other person or with people in a group. So that's a really important part of the critique relationship. The most important thing to know about a critique group is that you have to be ready to share your work. You have to be ready to share your work and to take critique, and then you have to be ready to read other people's work on their terms, not on your terms when you give critique. Because if you give critique where you're trying to turn other people's work into what you would do if you were making it, that's not critique. That's something totally different. And so you really have to be in a position where you can look at someone's work and really try to meet it on the terms that they have set forward. In the same way, you're asking people to do that for you. And it is a trade relationship. So you are trading your insights for their insights. I put out a poll among a bunch of other writers I know who had critique partners about how they had found their critique partners. And some of them said their spouses. And I think in those cases, they're often people who are partnered with other writers or other artists. And for me, I have actually never dated another artistic person. I don't know why. That dynamic, I feel like, wouldn't work for me, but for lots of people it's great. And so that's an example of someone who's been sharing their work a really long time. And then the other places people mentioned were online groups, and then some in person local to them, and some people who had were published said, other authors who worked with their agents. So the important thing is that across the board, it seems like it's authors who you were at the same level as, and that is one of the big recommendations I would have, is to really look at people who are where you are in your journey. There's a couple caveats to that I'll get to, but I think that's the best place to start. I have been in several different critique groups and critique relationships, and I think they kind of run the gamut of all the different ways that you can find critique partners. So I'm going to run through some of them. The first place that I met people to share critique with was in a writing class. Now, I do not have an MFA. I did not take any writing classes in college. I was really afraid to share my work for a really long time, but once I finally got to the point where I wanted to write, I knew I wanted to write, I could say I wanted to write, I took an extension class. We were living in Boston at that time, and I took an extension class at Lesley University, and it was taught by a novelist, and I met a number of other novelists, future novelists, aspiring novelists in that class. And that was my first experience with receiving critique and with giving critique. In that group, I saw some big danger spots, and I'll make another future video about what to be careful with once you find people to critique your work, because there's lots of danger, Will Robinson places. But right now I'm going to say, in that group, I met several people who I just clicked with their writing, and they seemed great. And they really seemed to connect with my writing. And for a little while, we exchanged work after that class. It didn't really take off, though. And that's one of the things you'll find with finding critique groups in general, is it's not a perfect system. Like, you'll connect with people and share with them for a while, and then, things will trail off. Maybe they'll stop writing. Maybe they'll start writing something you don't read. So none of this is permanent. I think we have this dream. We hear about these groups that are like, together forever, besties forever. And maybe those exist. I've been with my current critique partners for like 6 years, so I guess that's an example. But they also sometimes, people go different ways. People decide to quit. You can watch my video about whether or not it's time to quit if you like to talk about that, but people move on, or you don't connect in your work in the same way, or success gets in the way, which is another thing I'll talk about in a future video about once you're in a critique group. So one place to meet people is in a class. So you can meet other people in the class. And then after the class is over, you can reach out to them and ask if they'd like to continue sharing work. Or maybe they'll reach out to you, which is, always a positive when that happens. I will put a big warning here. Do not look to the professor as your opportunity to do this. Your professor is not someone for you to critique with because you're not peers. That's not the relationship. I have a family member who took a creative writing class and then after the class was over, sent something to the professor for critique and received sort of a short-tempered email about how busy the guy was and how he didn't really have time to read. And if you wanted him to critique, you had to take his class. Now, I think that could have been delivered in a different way. I think there's no reason to be a jerk about it, which is how that seemed to me. Of course, it's my family member, so, you're always protective of them. But the professor isn't your critique partner. The professor's not your peer. The people in the class are your peers. And you'll have a good sense when you take a class of who is at your level and who isn't. And so I would suggest looking at the people who are at your level or who write something that you really enjoy. Another opportunity to find critique partners that I highly recommend is through in-person meeting groups. They are all over the country. When we lived in Dallas, which is where I finally found people to critique my work, I started going to the DFW Writers Workshop, which meets every Wednesday night. Everybody's welcome, and you can go in and you can observe the first week, but then after that, you have to share a little bit of work. And they have a whole system. It's actually a great place to meet other writers. I'll share about the DFW workshop in the show notes below. But I think the important thing is all over the country, these things exist. And they are opportunities to meet other writers and share your work in the same way that I've mentioned before that my mom takes pastel classes and there's a pastel society, and that is another opportunity. You meet those people either at the class or in person, or you go to the meetings and you have a chance to share and grow with the people who were at your same level. The thing is that I totally understand that this is super hard. We lived in Boston for 7 years. I wanted to be a writer all 7 of those years, and I knew about Grub Street. I read about Grub Street. I'll also share a link to Grub Street below in the comments. I kept checking online about when their meetings were, about their conference, which is called the Muse in the Marketplace, and I could not make myself go. I went to the class at Leslie that I told you guys about, and all I needed to do was go to the meetings, and I couldn't do it. I think we just have to have grace with ourselves. I just was not confident enough about my work. Boston is a hard nut to crack. Everybody's so literary and I'm not literary, and you're hearing all those insecurities in my voice now. If we lived in Boston now, I would make myself go to Grub Street. A lot of writers that I love to read are connected with it. I wish that I had gone, but there's that old saying, if wishes were horses, then beggars would ride. You can only do what you can do, and that at that point in my writing. And also, I had 2 little kids. I was working a full-time job. There's lots of, bucket loads of grace to former me, but I could not make myself go. And then we moved to North Carolina, and I was trying to find a critique group. All the ones that I could find, you had to submit work to before you could be included. And you guys, that, I was already querying at that point, but still, that is really hard for me. Anything where you have to, submit and ask to be included, and there's somebody who could say no, I hate that. I really hate it. I hate it even now. This is still a work in progress for me, this part. I know there are things that I should be submitting to, and I still have a hard time because I have a hard time not with the external validation. I love external validation. It's the chance that someone would look at my work and be like, no. And obviously, I've been querying forever. My book went to publishers. It's not that. it's like, I can understand someone in a professional capacity saying no. It's the idea of like 10 people who meet at someone's house saying no that I just found very challenging, and I still find very challenging. Thankfully, submitting work to go meet in someone's living room is not something it turned out that I had to do, because when we moved to Dallas, I found the DFW Writers Workshop, and I went to that and I met a lot of really great writers at all phases of their career. And that's an example where the DFW Writers Workshop is an example where there's a really wide range of people's phases of their writing careers, and they're at all different levels, and so they're willing to share critique with you, which is great. And then my little writing group, which there's just 3 of us, was an offshoot of the DFW Writers Workshop because it was far from my house and it met at night, which was really hard for me because of having little kids at that time. So someone reached out to me to ask me if I would be willing to be in a daytime small writers group. There are 3 of us. There used to be 4, now there are 3. We meet for 2 hours every Thursday, and each person gets about a half an hour to talk about their work. And when I lived in Dallas, we met in person, and then when I moved to Arkansas, which was another move, you notice the theme, they let me stay on the phone while they were still meeting in person, which worked out fine. And now we're meeting on Zoom because we're in the days of Zoom, but which is great to see everyone's faces, but it still worked even with me on the phone. So I've also been in a critique group here in Arkansas, which I'm not in anymore because one of the problems I found is I only have so much time to read other people's work. So one critique group was all that I could manage. I know other people who sustain 2 or even 3. There's just a question about your time to actually produce writing, which for me is always my limiting factor, or to make videos or to do anything. Like, time management is my struggle. So that I was in a writing group here in Little Rock that came in through the Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators. And I am a member of that, and through that I got linked into a group of people who were writing similar stuff to me. And there are some pop-up versions like that, and then there are some, ad hoc, and there are some that people organize individually. So the other thing is, for some of you guys, you might live somewhere like a very small town or a part of the country where there just aren't that many people who do what you do. And so that is where I really encourage you to look online. There are subreddits for writers, and if you start looking there are fantasy writer subreddits, or all different kinds of places on Reddit. Of course, Reddit can be really sketchy, so just be careful, but you can find writers there. I have met a lot of people. I did not go through pitch wars. Someday I'll do a whole post on the querying process and pitch wars versus not pitch wars or other contests. I didn't do one of those. Just found my agent by querying. But a lot of people that have been through those, I think the key thing that they got out of it was community and critique partners. And so that's a benefit that you get even if you don't end up getting an agent. The other thing is Facebook groups. Look and see, is there a Facebook group of writers in your area? Is there a Facebook group of writers who write in the genre that you like? Is there a Facebook group of people who love, a certain thing that you like, and then you can, grow from that? I think the thing about it is that there is no path to do this, which is the thing about all of these forms of making art that we do. You can't just say like, okay, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to major in drawing, I'm going to graduate from college, I'm going to immediately make my drawings and take them to a gallery, and that's just not how it all works. It's just a funny business that each has its own path. And so as you go forward with every step, whether it's finding critique partners or whether it's growing your career, all those things, your path is going to be your path. And so when you start really looking, you will see opportunities all around, and they're yours to take and they're yours to say no to. I can say back in the day, Emily of Boston, why aren't you going to Grub Street? But I wasn't. And so, we just have to sort of push through what's scary, And then sometimes things are scary because you're not ready for them. Because being critiqued, you guys, it is really hard. It is really hard. Giving critique in a gentle, loving way, it's hard too. Like, they're hard. These things are hard. They're great. My writing got so much better because of critique. I have absolutely no doubt that I have a published novel because of critique. It's just absolutely true for me. But at the same time, sometimes my critique partners took me down completely the wrong path, because when you're working with people at your same level, which is what I recommend, sometimes they don't know any more than you do. They can only tell you, this isn't working for me, or this is working for me. And you still have to, make the changes from your heart. I'll really want to make a whole video about how to be critiqued, and I'll do that. So the important thing about everything that I want you to understand about critique partners and critique groups is that it's a strange relationship. It is not the same as your friends, but it certainly isn't enemies. It's not exactly colleagues, but that's maybe the closest analog. The best critique groups that I have been in, it's a friendship, but we do not spend the time that we're working on critique talking about our lives. We talk about our work. The other thing that's very fun about it is over the long term, you'll see some real transformations in your work and the work of other people. And if you're doing it right, you kind of ride along. One of my critique partners has become a podcaster, and it's been a while since she's written any fiction, but her podcast is incredible. Another critique partner started off writing really dark YA, and now she's writing this really beautiful, beautiful series for middle graders that's set along the ocean and is like a festival of light. And so just this process, it's like everything else. It's just, I want you to imagine this whole process as being more like the way that, plants wave in the ocean. Like, it's just movable, bendable, pliable. Like, the rigidity is what traps us. It's not going to be exactly how you think it's going to be, but that doesn't mean it's not going to be great. So I hope this helps. Let me know if you have any questions, and let me know in the comments if there's other things you'd like for me to talk about. Thanks so much. Bye, guys.